A new documentary is giving us a rare look at Cuban leader Fidel Castro and life in Cuba under his communist regime. The Netflix film Cuba and the Cameraman was filmed over the course of 45 years, and that cameraman was able to get up close and personal with Castro. Here's a look.
Fidel, I broke the blockade. I brought you the best beer in the United States. The best. I'm breaking the blockade.
¿De cuántos grados?
Muy fuerte, very strong.
Muchas gracias, me siento muy bien retribuido por toda la pregunta que te he contestado. Tú eres un periodista habilidoso. Bueno, les deseo que tengan éxito ustedes, que resuelvan los problemas sociales y económicos que tienen.
You want us to try and resolve the social and economic problems in the United States. You wish us success with that.
¿El qué?
I'm translating. Fidel, you used to speak English, you don't remember?
Sí, pero que se me ha olvidado el inglés. Ustedes hemos recibido tantas agresiones de Estados Unidos que se me ha olvidado el inglés.
Fidel, my daughter skipped school to come see you. Can you write a note to Tommy's teachers?
Está aquí.
Escribe para la maestra de ella.
¿Cómo?
Para la maestra de ella.
¿Cómo se llama tu maestra?
What's your teacher's name, Tom?
Which is the name of your teacher?
Señor Krinsky.
Senor Krensky.
¿Cómo se escribe eso de letrea?
How do you spell Mr. Krensky's name?
K-R-I-N.
En.
S-K.
¿Qué?
Y. Muchas gracias.
Question, Fidel?
Este es para mí.
Do you have a message for the children in America?
¿Cómo? Un saludo para todos los niños y que sean como tú, tan inteligentes como tú, tan simpáticos.
Oh my gosh. The man behind the lens, Emmy-winning and Academy Award-nominated documentary filmmaker Jon Aplert, and he joins me now. Did she hand that note in to her teacher?
She did, and it worked. I would have gotten in trouble when I was her age, but a note from Fidel works wonders, and it is hanging in the hallway at Stuyvesant High School. It's about 2 miles down. You know that terrorist bombing the other day was right in front of the guy in the truck.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Stuyvesant.
Oh, wow. Boy, there's sort of a warm and fuzzy and jovial Fidel Castro. Who knew beer diplomacy was really all it took?
There's a lot more in this film, things that normally people wouldn't see, lives of somebody like Fidel. Hey, Fidel, where do you sleep? I said, well, let's go. And, showed us his bedroom, his kitchen, and a lot of normal things that people don't really quite associate with leaders like Fidel.
Oh, that is so fascinating. So you started shooting this in 1972.
I did, and I was really terrible in those days. Very, very primitive camera, very primitive filmmaker.
Yeah, I saw some of the video. I mean, you had your equipment sort of in a wagon almost that you had to sort of pull around.
A baby carriage.
A baby carriage.
And we're pushing this, and we're chasing after Fidel, and all of a sudden he looks and he goes, oh my gosh, what's that? And he came running over to talk to us. So he was the one who initially initiated the conversation.
So what was your intention in 1972 when you started this? You didn't know you were going to be shooting for 45 years.
No, I certainly didn't know that. I was really interested in Cuba because we were using our cameras. We have a community media center in Chinatown. This is Downtown Community TV Center. And we were using our films to fight for better housing, better hospitals, and it wasn't working very well. And I was curious because Cuba was initiating a lot of the programs for universal health care that we were interested in right here in New York. So we decided to see for ourselves. There were a lot of people who were saying this is the best place in the world, a lot of people saying this is the worst place in the world, and we're ornery New Yorkers. We won't take anybody else's opinion. We wanted to see for ourselves.
And when you went down there, your first visit, your first impressions, your first feelings, because I looked at some of the video here and I thought, this man is in love with this country. Were you in love with it? Are you in love with it now? And were you in love with it upon your first arrival?
So initially I was kind of angry because they boat arrested us, and we went on a sailboat. It was the only way we could get into Cuba, and they wouldn't let us off the boat. And I kept on saying, Mike, if Cuba's so great and if everything is so wonderful over there, why won't you let me film it? And I annoyed them so much, they let us ashore for 3 hours, and then they kicked us out and told us, don't come back. But I wasn't in love, but I was really, really curious. We saw enough that it sort of whetted our appetite, and I just kept asking. And then I also formed a baseball team because I had to figure out how I'm going to make friends with the Cubans, how I'm going to get them to know about me. So we played the Cuban diplomats every Sunday in Central Park. 2 years, never won a game. But
They're good ball players.
They're good ball players, and they sort of enjoyed winning. They sort of enjoyed beating us. They enjoyed drinking beer, and they said, this guy's, he's not a bad guy. And so when we continued to request, they advocated on our behalf, and we were able to get our cameras into Cuba and go places that nobody else had gone before.
So you're going back over and over and over again, like I said, over a 45-year period.
Yeah.
And I know we talked about Fidel Castro, but you really are chronicling the lives of the Cuban people over these many decades, and you really got close to a few families.
We followed 3 families. One is a peasant family, 3 elder brothers, never got married, basically married to the land, and they farm in a very primitive fashion with oxen. It's sort of like the way we farmed in North Dakota 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot about life by following them. I also learned the successes and the failures and the difficulties of the revolution. You'll see and experience the Cuban Revolution through the eyes and what happened to these families. We also followed a street hustler, a guy who's living by his wits. He only makes $7 a month sweeping the park, but he's very active in the black market, and you learn how Cubans figure out how to survive and to deal with the system. He's a good hustler. And then there was a little girl I met when she was 7 years old. I never forgot her. She danced for me in the streets, and I always wondered what happened to her. And so I went and I found her, and I followed her family as well over this 45-year period.
Wow. Over this 45-year period, a lot has happened in Cuba. You know, you talk about the revolution and the post-revolution, but during that time, you know, there are sanctions, there is, you know, the USSR crumbles, and more recently, the lifting of sanctions or the easing of relations with President Obama, and now the tightening of these diplomatic relations. And so you're following these people and really the path of Cuba during this entire time.
Yes, and so if you want to sort of understand more about the Cuban Revolution but don't want to have to live there for 5 decades and experience it yourself, this film is a good film to watch.
Yeah. How do you feel about the situation in terms of America's relationship with Cuba now, especially with President Trump tightening relations, restricting relations again?
Well, I think it might have been a better idea to sort of let the Cubans do their thing and use them as an experiment. Let's watch and see whether universal health care works. Let's watch and see whether free education works, and maybe we could have applied some of these things to ourselves. We never sort of helped, and we never gave them a chance, and anytime we could sort of sock them, we socked them as hard as we could. We helped destroy they did a pretty good job, you know, not progressing their economy, but we dumped our sugar reserves on the international market, crashed the sugar price in order to ruin their economy. When the Soviet Union pulled the plug, their gross national product shrunk by almost 85%. Can you imagine losing 85% of your income, more or less overnight? So it's been a real struggle. The one thing that never succeeded in promoting regime change was the blockade. You know, the same guys are in power today as were in power at the beginning. If you turn on your cameras every single day for 50 years and they never worked, would you come here and stand in front of those cameras again and think you were going on TV? So that policy didn't work. The fact that we're sort of walking backwards into that again, I don't understand it.
You know, a lot of people would argue, though, you know, this is a reaction to Fidel Castro's regime, in communist regime, and that, hey, he's no angel, and sure, he looks sort of cute there giving your daughter a note, but there are many, many people who despise this man. Was that something that you were sort of aware of when you were putting this together? I'm sure you got a lot of footage, and there's probably a lot of different ways you could portray this man.
Right.
You want to be balanced. You're a journalist.
Right.
I mean, how did you do that?
So there are things that you'll see in this film that nobody's ever filmed before, especially during what's called the special period, when the country was in economic free fall and there was very little food, there was no electricity. Things were literally dark there. And I think our documentation of this is something that nobody's ever been able to do before. And so this is not drinking the Kool-Aid or drinking the mojitos and thinking that everything in Cuba is wonderful. I think it's a pretty sobering view of what this country's really been like. And I've had people who left the country because they had violent opposition to the government.
Right.
They suffered personally, and they watched this film, and they think they might not agree with everything in it, but they think it's an objective portrayal, and they hope other people will watch it as well.
Okay, on a personal note, Cuba and the cameraman. The cameraman is typically behind the camera.
Correct.
Just tell me about how you feel about being, it's a story about you. Essentially, it's you and the country, but it's your embracing of the country. It's the way you connected with the people, from the peasant to the leader.
So I'm aging too in this thing, and it's sort of sad for me to see this. I mean, I was even this is just a few years ago, and I was more young. Final.
You look like a strapping man to me.
I had better posture and less wrinkles. So I spent years removing myself from the films. I worked many years at NBC. You work in network television. What's the most important part of any correspondent's day?
I don't know.
Not
It's a trick question because I was going to say of their day. I don't know, lunch.
It's this. No. It's the stand-up.
Right.
And they spend all day long. And I watch these guys. They try. What's in their briefcases? It was makeup. Sometimes they never left the hotel room. I'm sorry, I don't want to be mean to everybody.
No.
There's a lot of hard-working correspondents, but all you guys in the newsroom, you know what I'm talking about. And they sit on the balcony and wait for the sun to get just right so they look good in the stand-up. And I didn't like this. And I also didn't like narration, and I wasn't a very good writer, so I was making programs without me in it, with no narration. I did this for years, and I took myself completely out of this, and it hurt the film because I didn't want to be part of it. But I realized at some point that these were really my friends. They were reacting to me, and so towards the end of the film, I'm in it more than normal. But they're the stars.
That. You know why I love that? Because that's honest storytelling. Because the reality of it is that you're there, you're asking the questions, you are part of the story. So why not let the audience see how you've compiled that story? I think that's great.
And so we did. And so you'll see me age and turn into an old man before your eyes. I watched this and
I don't see an old man. Where?
I'm telling you, you'll see the young, vigorous, to some degree naive and primitive filmmaker who goes to Cuba for the first time in 1972, hoping that everything is going to be wonderful, and then you'll basically walk with me for 45 years and see the reality.
Cuba and the Cameraman, Jon Aplert. I look forward to watching it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for talking to me.